Crixtal adjusted his ceremonial sash for the 15th time in 10 minutes, his four arms working in perfect synchronization as he surveyed the pristine diplomatic chamber of Nexus Station. Oh, how the mighty Galactic Federation had fallen! Here he was, senior security coordinator of the most advanced space station in 3 sectors, reduced to babysitting some primitive mammal from a backwater death world. The irony was not lost on him. Absolutely delicious, really. The chamber itself was a masterpiece of Federation engineering, gleaming silver walls lined with force field generators, atmospheric processors humming quietly in the background, and enough redundant safety systems to protect a newborn Qth-Larian larvae. Which, considering their guest, might actually be an appropriate comparison. These humans, from what the preliminary reports suggested, were barely more evolved than the creatures they apparently kept as pets. Status report? Crixtal barked into his communication device, his mandibles clicking with practiced authority. The response crackled back immediately, all systems green, coordinator. Guest transport arriving in T-12 minutes. 12 minutes to prepare for what would undoubtedly be the most tedious afternoon of his career. Crixtal's compound eyes swept across the assembled delegation, each representative a paragon of their species' evolutionary achievements. And here they were, waiting to greet some knuckle-dragging primate who probably still used combustion engines and ate processed meat. Ambassador This Era lounged gracefully on her heated perch, her scaled form radiating the kind of predatory elegance that had made the Saurian Empire a force to be reckoned with for millennia. Her golden eyes held an amused glitter as she observed Crixtal's nervous preening. "Perhaps you should relax, Coordinator," she hissed softly, her forked tongue tasting the air. "It's just one little human. What's the worst that could happen?" Commander Velquin's antennae twitched in what passed for laughter among his kind. The massive insectoid's exoskeleton gleamed under the chamber's artificial lighting, each segment a testament to millions of years of hive mind evolution. According to the intelligence reports, he buzzed in his harmonious voice, "These humans are remarkably fragile. Average lifespan of barely 80 rotations, primitive social structures, and they actually fight among themselves for resources." "How charmingly inefficient," bubbled Science Minister Borth AK from his environmental suit. The gelatinous being's translucent form pulsed with bioluminescent patterns of mild amusement. "My preliminary analysis suggests their neural capacity is adequate for basic tool use, but their emotional volatility makes them unsuitable for any serious scientific collaboration." Trade liaison Zep Uri ruffled her iridescent feathers, her beak clicking in what might have been agreement. "The economic projections are equally underwhelming," she chirped, her voice carrying the musical quality that made avian traders so effective in negotiations. "Their planet produces nothing we can't synthesize more efficiently. This entire exercise feels like a diplomatic formality." Crixtal nodded sagely, his confidence restored by his colleagues' assessments. "Yes, this would be a simple matter of protocol. Smile, nod, exchange pleasantries, and send the primitive back to its little blue rock with some trinkets and trade agreements that would keep them happy for a few decades." The Federation had handled dozens of emerging species, and the pattern was always the same. The initial contact, careful evaluation, gradual integration, and eventual absorption into the greater galactic community. The quantum gate began its activation sequence, filling the chamber with a low harmonic hum that resonated through the deck plating. Crixtal straightened his posture, mentally rehearsing his welcome speech. Something appropriately condescending, sorry, he meant appropriately welcoming and educational. These humans needed to understand their place in the galactic hierarchy from the very beginning. "Incoming transport detected," announced the station's AI in its perfectly modulated voice. "Earth diplomatic representative, designation Maya Blackwood, arriving in 30 seconds. Maya Blackwood. Even the name sounded primitive. Crixtal wondered if it had some significance in human culture, perhaps indicating her tribal affiliation or profession. Not that it mattered. Whatever backwater customs these creatures practiced, they would need to adapt to civilized society soon enough. The gate flared to brilliant life, energy cascading across its surface in patterns of impossible complexity. through the swirling vortex of folded space-time, a figure began to materialize. And Crixtal's first thought was, "That's it?" Maya Blackwood stood barely 5.5 feet tall, her brown hair pulled back in what humans apparently called a ponytail. She wore simple clothing, dark pants, a plain shirt, and footwear that looked more suitable for recreational activities than diplomatic functions. Her skin was pale, her build unremarkable, and her expression, well, she looked like she might be slightly nervous. This was Earth's representative? This slip of a girl who looked like she might blow away in a strong breeze? Crixtal had to suppress a laugh. The Federation's intelligence network had truly outdone itself this time. They'd built up these humans as potentially dangerous Deathworlders when the reality was standing before him, a scared child who probably weighed less than his left arm. "Welcome to Nexus Station," Crixtal announced with all the gravitas he could muster, though internally he was already composing his report about this farce. "I am Senior Security Coordinator Crixtal, and these are my esteemed colleagues. We trust your journey was comfortable?" Maya Blackwood looked up at the assembled aliens with what appeared to be genuine wonder, her eyes wide as she took in their diverse forms. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost shy. "Thank you so much for having me. This is wow. This is really incredible. I've never seen anything like this before. Oh, how adorable." The primitive was impressed by basic Federation architecture. Crixtal exchanged a meaningful glance with Ambassador This Ara, who was clearly struggling not to smile. This was going to be even easier than they'd anticipated. "Now then, Miss Blackwood," Crixtal began, his tone dripping with the kind of patience typically reserved for explaining quantum mechanics to a houseplant. "Before we begin our tour, there are some safety protocols we must review. I'm sure you understand." Maya nodded eagerly, her hands clasped behind her back like a school child on a field trip. "Of course. I want to make sure I don't accidentally break anything important." "Break something?" Crixtal's mandibles twitched with suppressed amusement. The girl looked like she might have trouble opening a pressure-sealed container, let alone damaging Federation technology. Still, protocol was protocol, no matter how absurdly unnecessary it might be. "Excellent attitude," he replied, gesturing grandly toward a wall display that materialized at his touch. "This facility represents the pinnacle of galactic engineering. These walls, for instance, are constructed from molecularly bonded tritanium alloy, capable of withstanding direct hits from Class 7 plasma cannons." Maya's eyes widened appropriately. "Wow, that sounds really strong. Really strong." The girl's vocabulary was as primitive as her appearance. Commander Velquin's antennae quivered with barely contained mirth, while Science Minister Borth AK's bioluminescent patterns pulsed in what his species considered polite laughter. "Indeed," Crixtal continued, warming to his subject. "And should any unlikely emergency occur, our force field network can isolate any section of the station within 0.003 seconds. Each barrier is powered by a dedicated fusion core and can repel anything short of a planetary bombardment." "That's really impressive," Maya said, tilting her head slightly. "How do the force fields handle variable atmospheric pressure differentials during rapid deployment?" Crixtal paused. That was actually a reasonably technical question. Probably something she'd overheard from her planet's scientists during the pre-contact briefings. Well, they utilize quantum stabilization matrices to maintain coherent field integrity across multiple environmental parameters." "Oh, that makes sense," Maya replied with a bright smile. "I was just curious because the emitter arrays look like they're positioned for overlapping coverage patterns." "Emitter arrays?" Crixtal glanced at the wall panels, suddenly realizing that yes, the force field projectors were indeed visible if you knew what to look for. How had this primitive creature identified them so quickly? Probably just luck, or maybe humans had developed some rudimentary understanding of energy projection systems. Very observant, he managed, then quickly moved on. "Now let me show you our security checkpoint system. As you can see, we have multiple scanning protocols designed to detect any potentially hazardous materials or devices." They approached the first checkpoint, where a shimmering energy curtain blocked their path. Maya stepped forward confidently, apparently unbothered by the fact that the scanner was designed to analyze everything down to the molecular level. The device hummed for several seconds before chiming its approval. "Scan complete," announced the automated system. "Human female, approximately 19 standard years, no weapons or contraband detected. Academic identification confirmed, student status verified." "You're a student?" Ambassador This Era asked with the kind of indulgent interest one might show a particularly clever pet. "How delightful. What do you study, dear?" Maya's cheeks colored slightly. "Oh, just general sciences. Nothing too exciting." "Nothing too exciting, of course not." Krixtal filed away this information with the same attention he might give to learning about local weather patterns. Human education was probably limited to basic mathematics and rudimentary physics anyway. As they moved through the facility, Maya continued to ask questions that sounded intelligent on the surface, but were clearly the product of an unsophisticated mind trying to grasp concepts far beyond its capacity. She inquired about the station's rotation schedule, wondering aloud how the artificial gravity generators maintained consistent fields across different sections. She noticed the redundant power coupling systems and asked if they were for backup purposes. She even commented on the corridor design, mentioning something about tactical sight lines which Krixtal assumed was some primitive human concept related to architecture. "You seem very interested in the technical aspects of our station," Trade Liaison Zep Uri chirped pleasantly as they passed through the third security checkpoint. "Do you have experience with space-based facilities?" "Not really," Maya admitted, her voice carrying that same shy quality. "This is actually my first time off-planet. Everything is so different from what I'm used to." First time off-planet. Krixtal almost felt sorry for the creature. Here she was, trying so hard to understand concepts that were utterly beyond her species' current level of development. It was rather endearing in the same way that watching a juvenile attempt adult behaviors could be amusing. "I imagine it must be quite overwhelming," Science Minister Borthake gurgled sympathetically. "The transition from a single-planet perspective to galactic awareness can be challenging for emerging species." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "It definitely gives you a different perspective on things. Like I was just thinking about how the entire station is essentially a closed ecosystem suspended in vacuum, yet with multiple redundant life support systems and what looks like at least 17 different emergency evacuation protocols." 17? Krixtal blinked in surprise. There were actually 18 different evacuation protocols, but the fact that this human had identified so many of them from casual observation was, well, it was still probably just coincidence. These primitives did have functional pattern recognition abilities, after all. "Quite right," he said, his tone perhaps a bit less condescending than before. "Safety is, naturally, our primary concern when hosting representatives from developing worlds." "I really appreciate that," Maya replied earnestly. "I know I'm probably not what you were expecting for a diplomatic representative, but I promise I'll do my best not to cause any problems." Not what they were expecting? Krixtal almost laughed out loud. "Oh, my dear primitive child," he thought, "you are exactly what we were expecting. A harmless, slightly overwhelmed creature who poses about as much threat to galactic security as a particularly energetic dust mite." Commander Velquin's compound eyes glittered with amusement as he watched Maya crane her neck to observe the ceiling-mounted sensor arrays. "She seems quite manageable," he buzzed quietly to Krixtal. "Manageable?" Yes, that was precisely the word Krixtal would have chosen. This entire diplomatic exchange was going to be wonderfully, boringly routine. The first alarm klaxon shattered the comfortable atmosphere like a plasma bolt through silk. A harsh, mechanical wailing that echoed through the corridors, followed immediately by the soft chime of the station's communication system activating. "Attention all personnel," came the calm, measured voice of the central AI. "We are experiencing a minor technical malfunction in sectors 12 through 15. Please remain calm while maintenance teams address the issue." Crixtal's forearms gestured dismissively, though he couldn't quite suppress the slight twitch in his left mandible. Nothing to worry about, Miss Blackwood. These old stations occasionally have minor system hiccups. Perfectly normal. Maya nodded, but something in her posture had changed. Where moments before she had been craning her neck to look at ceiling fixtures like an eager tourist, now she stood perfectly still, her head tilted slightly, as if listening for something the others couldn't hear. Of course, she said quietly, "These things happen." A second alarm joined the first, this one deeper, more urgent. Ambassador Thissera's golden eyes narrowed, her tongue flicking out to taste the air with growing concern. "Crixtal," she hissed. "That's the containment protocol alert." Yes, well, Crixtal's confidence wavered as blast shutters began descending over the corridor windows with a series of metallic thunks. "I'm sure it's just a precautionary measure. The AI is probably just being overly cautious." The lights flickered once, twice, then switched to the ominous red glow of emergency illumination. In the crimson dimness, Maya's face had taken on an entirely different quality. Gone was the wide-eyed wonder of a curious student. Her eyes were now scanning their surroundings with methodical precision, cataloging exits, defensive positions, and potential weapons with the kind of systematic efficiency that made Crixtal's stomach acid churn. "Attention all personnel," the AI announced again, and this time there was an edge to its synthetic voice that suggested the situation was considerably more serious than advertised. "Containment breach confirmed in Sector 7. Security teams to emergency stations. All civilian personnel please proceed to designated safe zones immediately." Commander Velquinn's antennae drooped with obvious anxiety. "Sector 7? That's uncomfortably close to our current location." "How close exactly?" Maya asked, and her voice had lost its shy, hesitant quality entirely. Now it carried the crisp, direct tone of someone requesting tactical information. Science Minister Borth AK's bioluminescent patterns flickered nervously. Perhaps we should follow the AI's instructions and proceed to a safe zone." Crixtal tried to regain control of the situation, puffing out his thorax in what he hoped was an authoritative manner. Everyone remained calm. "As Senior Security Coordinator, I can assure you that this facility's safety systems are more than adequate to handle any conceivable emergency. We have 17 different emergency protocols, multiple redundant security measures, and—" 18, Maya corrected quietly. "What? 18 different emergency protocols? You mentioned 17 earlier, but there are actually 18. Maya's eyes were fixed on a wall panel that was now flashing amber warning symbols. "And unless I'm mistaken, we're currently experiencing a Class 4 containment failure, which means whatever's happening in Sector 7 is spreading through the station's primary systems. How in the name of the Seven Suns did this primitive creature know about Class 4 containment failures?" Crixtal's mandibles clicked nervously as he tried to process this information. That's impossible. Our security systems are impenetrable. Nothing could cause a system-wide malfunction of this magnitude unless—" The unmistakable sound of plasma cutters began echoing through the corridors, accompanied by harsh, guttural voices shouting in what sounded like old mercantile pidgin. Crixtal's worst fears crystallized into terrifying reality as the implications hit him like a meteor to the thorax. "Unless what?" Trade Liaison Zep Uri chirped, her feathers standing on end with alarm. "Unless it's not a malfunction at all," Maya said with disturbing calm. "Those are plasma torches cutting through security doors. A professional grade, military specification. And those voices, that's outer rim slang. Definitely not maintenance crew." The plasma cutting sounds grew louder, accompanied now by the distinctive hiss of melting metal and the acrid smell of superheated alloys. Through the emergency lighting's red glow, they could see sparks beginning to shower from the main security door at the far end of the corridor. "Pirates," Crixtal whispered, the word escaping his vocal cords like a death sentence. "Space pirates have infiltrated the station." Ambassador Thissera's scales rippled with barely controlled panic. "How is that possible? This is Nexus Station. We have the most advanced security systems in 3 sectors. Apparently not advanced enough, Maya observed, moving with surprising fluidity to position herself near what appeared to be a maintenance access panel. Her fingers traced along the wall's surface with the kind of familiarity that suggested she wasn't just admiring the architecture anymore. The plasma cutting intensified, and now they could hear voices more clearly. Rough, professional, discussing breach times and extraction protocols with the casual efficiency of beings who did this sort of thing for a living. How long until they break through? Commander Velquin buzzed, his compound eyes reflecting the emergency lighting in dozens of tiny red points. Maya glanced at the shower of sparks, estimating angles and cutting patterns with what looked like practiced expertise. At their current rate? Maybe 3 minutes. 4 if they're being careful about structural integrity. 3 minutes? Science Minister Borthake's gelatinous form began pulsing rapidly with bioluminescent distress signals. What do we do? Where do we go? The safe zones are on the other side of those security doors. Crix Tau felt his authority crumbling like sand in a solar storm. Everything he'd been trained for, every emergency protocol he'd memorized, but every security measure he'd helped implement, none of it had prepared him for this moment when sophisticated criminals were literally cutting their way through the station's defenses like they were made of tissue paper. We need to, he stammered, his forearms gesturing helplessly as his mind raced through increasingly hopeless options. We need to stay calm and think tactically, Maya said, her voice cutting through the chaos with surprising authority. How many of them do you think there are? How many what? Crix Tau managed. Pirates. Based on the cutting pattern and the coordination of their approach, I'd estimate 4 to 6 individuals. Professional-grade equipment, military training, probably ex-military or mercenary background. Maya paused, listening intently to the voices beyond the door. Definitely not your average salvage crew. The plasma cutting reached a crescendo, and then suddenly stopped. In the relative silence that followed, they could hear boots moving with purposeful precision, and the low murmur of voices conferring about their next move. Get ready, Maya said quietly, and for the first time since the alarms began, Crix Tau noticed that she didn't sound afraid at all. The security door collapsed inward with a thunderous crash, revealing 5 figures that looked like they'd stepped out of Crix Tau's worst nightmares about frontier criminals. Each pirate was a walking arsenal of cybernetic enhancements and military-grade weaponry that made Federation security equipment look like children's toys. The leader, a scarred humanoid with glowing red optical implants and arms that were more machine than flesh, he swept the room with a plasma rifle that hummed with barely contained energy. Well, he growled in accented standard, his voice carrying the kind of casual menace that came from years of making people disappear. Look what we have here. A whole diplomatic buffet. Crix Tau felt his legs go weak as the full horror of their situation crashed over him like a tidal wave of liquid terror. These weren't opportunistic scavengers or desperate refugees. These were professional killers, enhanced with military cybernetics that probably cost more than his annual salary. The kind of beings who ate Federation security protocols for breakfast and used the bones to pick their teeth. Ambassador this era had gone completely rigid, her reptilian brainstem apparently deciding that absolute stillness was the best survival strategy. Her golden eyes were fixed on the pirates' weapons with the kind of hypnotic terror that prey animals experienced when facing apex predators. Commander Velquin's compound eyes were darting frantically between the intruders and potential escape routes, his antennae flat against his head in a display of pure panic. The clicking sounds emerging from his thorax suggested his species' equivalent of hyperventilation. Science Minister Borthake had literally tried to make himself smaller, his gelatinous form compressing into the corner like he was attempting to achieve some sort of molecular invisibility. His bioluminescent patterns were flashing in rapid, chaotic sequences that probably translated to various prayers to whatever deities his people worshipped. Trade liaison Zep Uri had gone into full threat display mode, her feathers standing completely on end, making her look like an iridescent pincushion. Unfortunately, What might intimidate a rival trader in a business negotiation looked rather pathetic when facing beings who specialized in violence for profit. "Please," Crixtal stammered, his voice cracking like an adolescent's as he tried to remember his crisis negotiation training. "There's no need for violence. We can discuss terms. The Federation has protocols for these situations." The second pirate, a female with neural interface ports covering half her skull, laughed with genuine amusement. "Protocols? Oh, that's rich. Tell me, Bug Boy, how many of your precious protocols involve actual shooting?" We don't believe in solving conflicts through violence," Crixtal managed, his forearms trembling as he raised them in what he hoped was a universal gesture of surrender. "Of course you don't," sneered a third pirate, this one cybernetically enhanced to the point where determining his original species was impossible. "That's what makes you Federation types such perfect targets. All that advanced technology, all those fancy defenses, and when push comes to shove, you fold faster than a house of cards in a solar storm." The leader stepped forward, his augmented eyes scanning each alien with predatory interest. "Here's how this works, friends. You're all very valuable diplomatic assets. Your respective governments will pay handsomely for your safe return. We're talking about the kind of ransom that could buy a small moon." Maya had been moving with almost imperceptible stealth during this exchange, positioning herself near what looked like an environmental control panel. To the aliens, she appeared to be trying to hide behind the maintenance access, just another terrified primitive seeking shelter. But Crixtal noticed that her hands were tracing patterns on the panel's surface with suspicious familiarity. "Oh, now," the leader continued, clearly enjoying his captive audience, "we're going to have a nice, quiet trip to a secure location where we can conduct our business negotiations in comfort. Any resistance, any attempts at heroics, and we start sending pieces of you back to your homeworlds until someone gets motivated to pay up." How did you get past our security systems?" Ambassador This Era managed to hiss, her voice barely above a whisper. The female pirate grinned, revealing teeth that had been replaced with titanium implants. "Let's just say your impenetrable defenses aren't quite as impressive as advertised. Amazing what a few well-placed electromagnetic pulse devices can accomplish." "That's impossible," Commander Velquin buzzed weakly. "Our systems are hardened against EMP attacks." "Sure they are," the cyborg pirate chuckled. "Just like they were hardened against plasma cutters, sensor scramblers, and good old-fashioned bribery. Funny thing about absolute security, there's always someone smart enough to find the cracks." Maya raised her hand slightly, like a student seeking permission to speak. When she did, her voice carried that same shy, hesitant quality that had charmed the aliens earlier. "Excuse me? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was just wondering, this station uses rotating gravity generators, right? Not gravitometric field manipulation?" The pirates turned to look at her with expressions ranging from amusement to irritation. The leader's cybernetic eyes focused on Maya with the kind of attention one might give to a particularly interesting insect. "What's it matter to you, little girl?" he asked, his tone suggesting that her curiosity was more annoying than threatening. "Oh, I was just curious," Maya replied with that same innocent smile that had fooled the Federation delegation so completely. "I'm studying engineering, and I've never been on a station this large before. I was wondering how the artificial gravity works across different sections." Science Minister Borthake's bioluminescent patterns flickered with confusion. Even in their current dire circumstances, he couldn't understand why the human was asking about gravity generators when they were all facing imminent kidnapping or worse. The female pirate rolled her augmented eyes. "Great. The primitive wants a physics lesson." "Yes, sweetheart. It uses rotating sections with localized field adjustments." "Satisfied?" "Very much so," Maya said, and there was something in her tone that made Crixtal's survival instincts suddenly scream warnings that his conscious mind couldn't quite process. "Thank you for clarifying that." The leader hefted his plasma rifle impatiently. "Enough chatter. Time to move. Everyone up, single file, no sudden movements." But as the pirates began organizing their captives for transport, none of them noticed that Maya's fingers had found exactly what she'd been looking for on the environmental control panel. And none of them realized that her innocent question about gravity generators hadn't been curiosity at all. It had been reconnaissance. At exactly 1658, Maya Blackwood stopped being a harmless student and became something that made every survival instinct in the galaxy scream warnings. Actually, she said conversationally, her hand finding the gravity control interface with practiced precision, I should probably mention that I'm not really studying general sciences. The transformation was so sudden, so complete, that Crixtal's brain took several precious seconds to process what he was witnessing. The shy, curious girl who had been asking innocent questions about station architecture was gone, replaced by something that moved with the fluid, predatory grace of a born killer. I'm a third-year cadet at Earth's military academy, Maya continued, her voice now carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to giving orders under fire, specializing in xenobiology and close-quarters combat. The lead pirate's cybernetic eyes widened in recognition of the threat just as Maya's fingers completed their sequence on the control panel. Oh, phoo. The gravity in their section cut out completely. What happened next unfolded with such surgical precision that Crixtal's compound eyes could barely track the sequence of events. In the sudden weightlessness, the pirates flailed helplessly, their heavy cybernetic enhancements that had made them so intimidating in normal gravity now working against them like anchors in space. Maya, however, moved like she had been born in zero gravity. Her first target was the female pirate with the neural implants, who was struggling to orient her weapon in the floating environment. Maya pushed off from the wall with calculated force, her trajectory intersecting with the pirate's position, just as the criminal managed to bring her rifle to bear. The human's elbow connected with the base of the pirate's skull with precisely the right amount of force to short-circuit her neural interfaces without causing permanent brain damage. As the pirate convulsed and went limp, Maya appropriated her plasma rifle with a fluid motion that suggested she had trained extensively with similar weapons. 17 seconds, Maya announced calmly, as if she were conducting a classroom demonstration. The cyborg pirate, adaptable enough to compensate for the gravity loss, fired a burst from his weapon that would have vaporized Maya's previous position. But she wasn't there anymore. Using Ambassador this era's perch as a launching point, she had ricocheted across the chamber with mathematical precision, the plasma bolts passing harmlessly through empty space. 29 seconds, she continued, using the stolen rifle to disable the cyborg's weapon rather than kill him outright. The precise shot severed the power coupling without damaging the main body of the gun, demonstrating a knowledge of weapons technology that should have been impossible for someone from a newly contacted world. The third pirate, realizing that standard tactics weren't working, attempted to use Commander Vel Quinn as a human insectoid shield. Maya's response was to reactivate the gravity at exactly the right moment to send the pirate tumbling while leaving the commander safely anchored to his magnetic perch. 41 seconds, Maya said, catching the falling pirate with a movement that looked more like a dance step than a combat maneuver. Her hand found the pressure point behind his ear that would render him unconscious without permanent damage, a technique that suggested intimate knowledge of humanoid neurophysiology. The fourth pirate, apparently the smartest of the group, attempted to activate some kind of emergency beacon. Maya's response was to use the chamber's own atmospheric recycling system against him, triggering a localized pressure differential that sent him spinning helplessly while she relieved him of both his beacon and his consciousness. 58 seconds, she announced, standing calmly in the center of the chamber as the last pirate, the leader with the glowing red eyes, struggled to comprehend how his carefully planned operation had been dismantled by a teenager who weighed less than his cybernetic arm. "You," he gasped, his enhanced vocal cords struggling to form words. "You're not human. Humans are supposed to be weak. Peaceful. You can't possibly." "Oh, we are peaceful," Maya replied with that same shy smile she had worn throughout the station tour. "We just have a very different definition of peace than most species." See, we've learned that the best way to maintain peace is to be absolutely, unquestionably capable of winning any war that might threaten it. She gestured casually at the 5 unconscious pirates scattered around the chamber like discarded toys. This was actually pretty easy compared to my final exams. Professor Martinez had us neutralize 12 opponents in a zero-gravity scenario while protecting civilian assets and maintaining minimal collateral damage. I barely passed that one. Crixtal's mandibles hung open in shock as he tried to process the casual way Maya discussed what amounted to military operations that would challenge veteran Federation Special Forces. You're saying this was a training exercise? Not exactly, Maya said, beginning to secure the unconscious pirates with plastic restraints she had apparently been carrying in her pockets. But the principles are the same. Assess the tactical situation, identify environmental advantages, exploit opponent weaknesses, neutralize threats with minimal necessary force. Ambassador Thisara's voice was barely a whisper. Minimal necessary force? Oh yes, Maya replied cheerfully. I could have killed them all in about 15 seconds if that had been the objective. But Earth's military doctrine emphasizes precision over brutality. Dead enemies can't provide intelligence, and excessive force tends to create diplomatic complications. Science Minister Borth AK's bioluminescent patterns were flashing in patterns that roughly translated to religious awe mixed with existential terror. How did you know about our biology? The pressure points, the neural interfaces. Maya's expression took on the slightly embarrassed look of a student caught showing off. Well, that's the xenobiology part of my studies. We're required to memorize the physiological vulnerabilities of all known sapient species. You know, just in case we ever need to subdue someone without causing permanent harm. All known sapient species? Commander Velquin buzzed weakly. About 437 as of last semester, Maya confirmed. Though I hear they're adding more to the curriculum next year. Trade liaison Zep Yuri's feathers were still standing completely on end. And they teach this to students? Third-year students, Maya corrected. The first 2 years are mostly basic combat theory, small unit tactics, and interspecies cultural sensitivity training. You don't get to the really interesting stuff until your specialization years. Crixtal felt his worldview cracking like poorly maintained hull plating. Cultural sensitivity training? Oh, that's very important, Maya said seriously, checking the restraints on the unconscious pirates. We need to understand how different species think and react so we can better protect them when necessary. Like I knew that triggering your various fear responses would keep you all safely out of the way during the engagement. She paused, looking slightly concerned. I hope I didn't traumatize anyone too badly. The psychological impact assessment was covered in semester 4, but I haven't taken that class yet. As Maya stood there, looking genuinely worried about their emotional well-being while surrounded by 5 unconscious pirates she had defeated in less than a minute, Crixtal realized that every single assumption the Federation had made about humanity was not just wrong, but catastrophically, hilariously wrong. And somehow that thought was even more terrifying than the pirates had been. The station's security forces arrived exactly 12 minutes later, their heavy boots thundering through the corridors with all the urgency of beings responding to a major crisis. What they found when they burst through the damaged doorway was a scene that would be talked about in Federation security circles for decades to come. 5 notorious pirates, each worth enough bounty credits to fund a small colony, lay unconscious and neatly restrained in the center of the diplomatic chamber. Maya Blackwood sat cross-legged beside them, carefully checking their pulse rates and applying basic first aid to ensure they hadn't suffered any permanent damage during their rather abrupt encounter with human military training. Oh, hello, Maya said brightly to the heavily armed security team, looking up from where she was adjusting a makeshift splint on one pirate's cybernetic arm. I think this one might have overloaded his neural interfaces when he hit the wall. You'll probably want to have a medical technician check that out. The security chief, a grizzled veteran of 3 frontier conflicts, had stared at the scene with the expression of someone whose reality had just been fed through a matter transporter and reassembled backwards. Miss, what exactly happened here? Just a small misunderstanding, Maya replied with the same cheerful demeanor she had displayed throughout the entire station tour. These gentlemen were attempting to conduct some unauthorized business negotiations, but we managed to sort everything out. Krixtau felt his sanity slipping away like atmosphere through a hull breach as he watched this slip of a girl discuss the systematic dismantling of a professional pirate crew like she was describing a minor scheduling conflict. His entire career, his entire understanding of galactic power dynamics, his carefully constructed worldview, all of it was crumbling like a sandcastle in a tsunami. Humans weren't primitive Deathworlders struggling to understand basic technology. They were apex predators masquerading as harmless academics, and they had been studying the rest of the galaxy with the methodical precision of hunters learning about their prey. Ambassador This Azara's internal monologue was a litany of terror and awe that roughly translated to, by the 7 sacred molts, we invited a apex predator into our den and spent the afternoon patronizing it while it catalogued our weaknesses. Her species had ruled through carefully calculated intimidation for millennia, but watching Maya casually disable 5 cybernetically enhanced criminals had shown her exactly how far down the food chain the Saurian Empire actually ranked. Commander Velquin's compound eyes were fixed on Maya with the kind of fascination typically reserved for natural disasters or phenomena that defied known physics. His hive mind upbringing had taught him to value collective efficiency above all else. But this human had demonstrated individual capabilities that surpassed entire military units. The implications for interspecies conflict resolution were both fascinating and absolutely terrifying. Science Minister Borthag K. was experiencing something roughly equivalent to an existential crisis. His entire scientific methodology was based on careful observation and gradual understanding, but Maya had demonstrated knowledge of Xenobiology that suggested humans had been studying galactic species with military precision for far longer than anyone had realized. How much did they actually know? How long had they been watching? Trade liaison Zep Yuri's mind was racing through economic calculations that made her head feathers stand on end. If humans could field military assets with this kind of capability, what did that mean for galactic power structures? For trade negotiations? For the entire Federation's assumptions about resource distribution and territorial security? So, Maya said conversationally as the security team began processing the unconscious pirates, this was actually my first real-world application of the training. Usually we just run simulations back at the academy. The security chief, who was still trying to process how a teenager had accomplished something his entire department would have struggled with, managed to ask Academy? Earth Military Academy, Maya explained helpfully. I'm here as part of our student exchange program. It's a great way to get practical experience while building diplomatic relationships. Student exchange program. Krixtau's remaining sanity made a desperate bid for survival as he realized the full implications of that innocent phrase. Earth wasn't sending diplomats or cultural ambassadors. They were field testing their military cadets by sending them to interact with potential threats, potential allies. That's very interesting, Ambassador Thisara managed, her voice carrying all the enthusiasm of someone discussing their own execution. And this exchange program, how many students does Earth typically send out? Oh, dozens each semester, Maya replied cheerfully. We have cadets studying with the Altarian Defense Corps, the Centauri Border Guard, the Vegan Merchant Fleet, pretty much every major military organization in the galaxy. It's all part of our Advanced Cultural Integration Curriculum, which undoubtedly meant comprehensive military intelligence gathering disguised as educational cooperation. Speaking of which, Maya continued with that same innocent enthusiasm that now made everyone in the room want to check for hidden recording devices. I was wondering if any of your species would be interested in establishing formal cultural exchange programs with our military institutions? We're always looking for opportunities to learn more about galactic diversity. The silence that followed was so profound that it seemed to have achieved its own gravitational field. The idea of sending their own military personnel to train alongside humans who considered this morning's violence to be pretty easy. compared to their final exams was roughly equivalent to volunteering for creative suicide. We'll certainly discuss that possibility, Commander Vel Quinn buzzed weakly. Wonderful, Maya beamed. I'll mention it in my report. Oh, and I should probably tell you that I'll be attending the Federation's Peace Summit next month as part of my advanced diplomacy coursework. I'm really looking forward to meeting representatives from all the major species. Advanced diplomacy coursework at a peace summit, where she would undoubtedly be cataloging the defensive capabilities and psychological profiles of every major galactic power, while smiling and asking innocent questions about their cultural traditions. As the security forces finished their work and began escorting the prisoners away, Kriegstal found himself alone in his office, staring at a blank report form that would require him to explain the day's events to his superiors. How exactly did one document the complete failure of every assumption the Federation had made about humanity? His final log entry was a masterpiece of bureaucratic understatement. Recommend immediate and comprehensive revision of all Deathworlder contact protocols. Previous assessments of human capabilities may have been somewhat inaccurate. Request emergency consultation with Xenobiology Department regarding appropriate diplomatic response to species that considers military combat training to be standard educational curriculum. Meanwhile, Maya was already at the departure gate, checking her travel itinerary with the same methodical attention to detail she had shown when neutralizing armed pirates. Let's see. She murmured to herself, peace summit next month, followed by cultural exchange visits to 4 different homeworlds, then back to Earth for advanced tactical planning seminars. She paused, looking up at the departure board with genuine excitement. This is going to be such a great semester. Kriegstal, monitoring the departure through security cameras, watched the young human board her transport with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for watching natural disasters unfold. Somewhere in the depths of his consciousness, a small voice was whispering that the galaxy was about to become a very different place. And that voice was absolutely, terrifyingly correct.